Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And 5 seasons into this series, the answer is no, but we still have a chance to change that answer, at least for the next month or so until the playoffs are over, and we'll find out whether or not we still have a job. Our A's were 73 and 89 this year, fourth in the American League West, only one win better than a pretty poor squad a year ago, so we did not make very significant progress this season, unfortunately. We did respectably with our goals to not completely be horrible and to increase attendance, but we have not acquired a top player, and we have not had any international amateurs make it to the majors over these past 5 seasons. But given that the first international amateurs we picked were in January of 2025 and they were 16-year-olds primarily at the time, I don't think it should be completely shocking that none of them have made the majors quite yet. But that said, Mr. Fisher will not be pleased with our performance. Taking a look at the team statistics for this season, we were 4 games worse than Pythagorean expectations. Expected to go 77 and 85. We went 73 and 89. Got off to a brutal start for a second consecutive year, and that really sunk us because after June, we were basically a 500 team, 14 and 13 in June, 12 and 12 in July, and then August, September, and October, we were just under 500 when all was said and done across those 3 months. Had our best month of the year in September at 16 and 11. The issue, as it often has been for us through this playthrough, is that we don't have a lot of offense. 14th in the American League in runs scored. You can see we were in the bottom 4 or 5 teams in just about every offensive category, middle of the pack in walks and strikeouts, and we have wasted a really good pitching staff. We were second in the National League in American League in runs allowed, and we were in the top 5 in every pitching category. Honestly, the top 3 in every pitching category, except for walks and strikeouts, where we were more middle of the pack. Also second in defensive efficiency and second in zone rating. So we have pretty good pitching, we have pretty good fielding, and it just doesn't matter because we can't score any runs. And bringing on players who are impact offensive players, given the budgetary constraints we've been under, just hasn't been anything we've been able to pull off over the years. We've had Anthony Santander. This past off season, we signed Ketel Marte. There have been pockets of success with those guys and pockets of less success with the veteran players that we've paid moderate money, big money for the A's, but moderate money in the context of baseball for, and then also had some success, but more lack of success with bargain free agents that we've brought in as well. And we are going to have to change that this upcoming off season. Can see we're still last in budget, last in player payroll, and who knows what our budget is going to look like a month from now as we start preparing for the 2028 to 2029 off season. I think we'll likely keep our job. We got a 3-year extension last off season, and as I noted, we at least did respectably with our attendance and our team record goals. We'll find out in about a month, but until we do that, we are going to check out our roster today, start planning what we think our roster should look like in the future, who's going to be back, who's not going to be back, and probably most importantly, who are we uncertain about and need to figure out. Also take a look at a few of our prospects and some of the more interesting prospects around the game before we find out who the 2028 World Series champion is and get the offseason underway in earnest. And as the postseason gets underway, our division rival, the Seattle Mariners, and the Tampa Bay Rays, who swept us in 4 games in our final series of the year as we were trying to get into the mid to high 70s in terms of wins, will have the byes in the American League. In the National League, the Brewers and the Dodgers with the byes. Rockies will face the Cubs, Diamondbacks against the Braves, White Sox and Guardians, and Red Sox and Orioles in the wild card series in each of the 2 leagues. And we mentioned a couple episodes ago that we had started off this series basically firing a ton of coaches throughout the Oakland A's organization. So 5 years into this playthrough, after we gave them all 5-year contracts, we had a lot of potential renewals, most of which that we wanted to get, we have got signed to an extension. Is going to be some turnover this year. We are going to not re-sign manager Mark Kotsay, who we actually inherited as the Oakland A's manager. He is going to be my sacrificial lamb, hopefully by throwing Kotsay overboard, by not renewing his contract. Maybe that will give me a little more discretion to come back next year as the general manager. To be fair, we haven't developed a lot of minor league players over the years, and that is certainly the general manager's responsibility more than the manager's responsibility, but it's good to be in charge of those hiring and firing decisions, or in this case, just the decision to let Kotsay move on. And we are going to be moving on from him, as well as bench coach Mike Freeman and first base coach Eric Young Jr. this offseason. Like our minor league coaching, some of those players are looking for promotions, so we may end up filling some of those gaps with coaches or managers out of our minor league system. And we'll also be looking to do a fair amount of hiring, assuming we're still in charge when we do get to the off season. And some of you have asked over the seasons about our staff cohesion and our team chemistry, and I've commented the team just sucks, but people are not angry with one another or sniping at one another or backstabbing one another that much. I don't know if that's good or bad. It would be great if there were some obvious personnel issues or issues in the clubhouse going on, but it's really more a lack of talent than anything else. You can see the staff cohesion here is happy, and then when we look at our team chemistry, it's actually ecstatic. We've got a lot of very positive players in the clubhouse, nobody who's disruptive, outspoken, selfish, or unmotivated. Kotsay generally has good relationships with most of the players on the team. Not that he'll be coming back anyways, but no complaints about team chemistry. We've got a pretty happy clubhouse. Maybe we've made it a little too happy, and we need to make things a little more uncomfortable for some of these players and ensure that they're playing for their jobs every day that they go out there. So turning to the review of our team, and we'll start with our strength, which is our pitching staff. Mason Miller, 8-10 record this year, but he was improved from a year ago. His ERA was 70 points lower, allowed fewer home runs and a lot fewer walks, despite pitching more innings. His WHIP was down 10 points. His SIERA was improved. Above average as far as his ERA plus and his FIP minus, and put up a 2.7 WAR. Still a 5-inning pitcher at this point, but a more than respectable season, and we did sign him to that front-loaded contract. So the $10 million he made this year is the biggest figure that he's going to have. We'll see how he ages into his mid-30s. Definitely some risk in the size of this contract for a team with our payroll. Certainly need him to be better to live up to that contract, but I think it is possible he could be better next year. Bubba Chandler, who we picked up in a trade a season and a half ago, 8-10 with a 4.40 ERA his first season in Oakland. 3.76 SIERA, pretty much average in terms of his ERA plus and FIP minus, a WAR of almost 2. Not a great year, but he's signed to a fairly reasonable contract with some optionality at the end. Mike Vassell, we traded for this year. He was 3-4 with a 4.24 ERA, looking to be making, actually was $5 million when we picked him up, so he's performed poorly enough with us that his arbitration number for next year expected to be about $4.4 million. We will likely bring him back at that number. Guy we will certainly be bringing back is Kyle Bradish. Baltimore was sick of him after 2 pretty rough seasons. They traded him away to us, and they kept the majority of his contract, not just this year, but next year as well. And all we got out of him was a team best 10 wins and a league best 2.66 ERA, 233 BABIP, and 1.03 WHIP. Certainly aren't expecting as big a season from him next year, but it seems like the veteran fit in well with this Oakland team and was certainly our top pitcher this year. We reunited with Colby Allard right before the trade deadline. He went 5-5 with a 4.86 ERA. Believe he is a free agent, and I think he's going to be looking for some decent money. Yeah, around $8 million a year for 3 years. So we will once again be moving on from Mr. Allard this offseason. Turning to our bullpen, closer Chase Lee, 38 saves for us, 3.68 ERA over 63 2/3 innings. Honestly, he was barely above replacement level. He is signed for the next couple years, $2 million next year, and then team options the 2 years after that. So he will likely be back. It's a pretty reasonable contract for the former Rule 5 pick. Jordan Romano, we picked up in a trade with the Cubs, and he was not good. A 1-5 record and a devilish 6.66 ERA for us. Allowed 4 homers and 10 walks in 24 2/3 innings, slightly below replacement level. They kept the majority of his contract, so he'll be back with us, or at least in the mix to be back with us next year. If we need to move on from him, we certainly will. Ben Leeper, a setup guy for us this year, 3.94 ERA over 45 2/3 innings. He is a solid, respectable reliever. Still not eligible for salary arbitration, so he'll be making the minimum next year. Another Rule 5 pick who will likely be back with us. Kyle Nelson had a fantastic season, 6-1 record, 179 ERA over 80 1/3 innings pitched. Only allowed 3 homers on the season. Put up a WAR of close to 2 for us working out of the bullpen. Left-hander is due to be making around $5 million next year. That is probably going to be more than we can afford for a left-handed arm in the bullpen, especially if we do end up doing something to try to help our offense this offseason. Hopefully he still has a little bit of trade value, and we might be able to get something for him in return. Bennett Souza making $1 million this year. He is headed to free agency, I believe. Yes, his contract expires now. It was only a 1-year deal. He was fine, split the time this year between AAA and the majors, but certainly most of it in the majors. He was a respectable left-handed arm. Looking for $1.5 million. It's possible we bring him back, especially if we end up moving on from Nelson, but there are other lefties in the mix for us. Emmett Sheehan, like him on paper, better than the way he actually performed. Picked him up on waivers right before the season started. Began the year for us in the rotation. Ended up pulling him from the rotation. A 5-12 record, 5.70 ERA over 113 2/3 innings. Allowed 19 home runs. His fly ball pitching tendencies did not play very well for us this year. He is set to make $2 million next year. Given the stuff that he has, I think he still could be in the mix to be on our team. but no guarantees that he'll be back. Speaking of no guarantees, Jesus Soto led the league in games for us a year ago. Then we waived and DFA'd him in the offseason. No one picked him up, so we were able to kind of reset him to the major league minimum, which worked out for us. Had a 3.46 ERA, 39 innings at the major league level, set to make $1.1 million this upcoming year in arbitration. I tend to think that although Nelson is almost certainly gone and Souza is possibly gone, Soto at that number probably will be back. Clark Schmidt, who we pulled from the rotation after his velocity dipped dramatically this past offseason, had actually a pretty solid year for us. Pitched 110 innings out of the bullpen, only started one game. ERA around 3, a WAR of close to 1. He was not great. He is due $7.5 million this upcoming year if we exercise his team option. I think we will certainly look to trade him if there's any value from someone with a bigger budget than us. Otherwise, we will almost certainly decline his option. And last but not least, Angel Perdomo, Rule 5 lefty that we picked up from the Giants. Put up a 2.68 ERA, struck out 64 batters in 50 and a third innings, being used primarily as a lefty specialist. Did the job well for us, set to make close to $2 million next year in arbitration, so another lefty out of our bullpen where we're going to have an interesting decision. Pretty sure Soto will be back. Pretty sure Nelson will not be. Souza and Perdomo. Hard to imagine more than one of them will be back with us next year with the potential numbers that they are looking for, but don't mind Miller, Chandler, Vassell, and Bradish as potential starters for us next year, and Lee, Romano, Leaper, Sheehan, Soto likely to be back. 5 guys in the bullpen, 4 guys in the rotation, and certainly a possibility that 1 or 2 of the other guys in the bullpen are back. So feel like this very good pitching staff is largely going to be intact next year. Hopefully by the end of next season, maybe we'll have an opportunity to have previous draftees like Duncan Marston potentially helping us at the major league level. So I don't think we're going to invest a ton of trade resources or free agent dollars in improving the pitching staff this offseason. Probably try to run it back 70% or so with guys that we are looking at and talking about right now. Before we get through the first round of the playoffs and take a look at our position players, also a couple guys to mention on the injured list. Tim Herron, his career is over. He's going to retire as soon as the season is over. Mitch Spence recovering from that torn rotator cuff. His stuff has really fallen off the last couple of years. We like the ground ball tendencies. We like the captain personality. He's going to be due $2.1 million next year. It's possible, depending on how he looks over the winter and in spring training, that we might look to move on from him. As much as we like the captain personality with that low stamina, and now particularly with this below average stuff, he is certainly not an optimal arm to mix into our rotation. And my thought is that with the 4 guys that we already like, maybe look to use someone different in that 5th spot next year. But Spence is still with us for the time being, but I think things are probably trending towards moving on from him as well. And only one sweep in the wild card series this year. The Guardians took out the division rival White Sox in 2 games. All the rest of the series went 3. The Orioles taking out their division rival Red Sox, Diamondbacks upending the Braves, and the Cubs taking out the Rockies. So before we turn to our position players, we'll take a look at the position player who ended up on the IL, Cameron Cawley, going to be out for another 5 to 6 months, so he will hopefully be back in the middle of spring training. recovering from a ruptured MCL. Love Cawley's speed, love Cawley's glove. The issue is he's just never proven to be a successful major league hitter. Hit just a $195 this year, only 13 extra base hits in 236 at-bats, 61 WRC plus. He's put up about a 1 WAR in half seasons each of the last 2 years in the majors, but the injury issues have been a big issue, and as good as the glove is, and as good as he is on the base paths, being successful, stealing 14 of 16 tries over the last couple of years, he just has not hit quite enough. Still will be making the major league minimum for 1 more year, so he will be in the mix to be our starting shortstop again next year just by virtue of his great defense, but it would be nice to get a little more offensive production out of him. If he could just get those WRC pluses up to the 80 range with that glove and that speed, he'd be a pretty interesting player for us. But thus far, he has not demonstrated any ability to get the batting average consistently above 200 against major league pitching. Turning now to our healthy position players, and this is the area where we're expecting there to be some pretty significant turnover this upcoming offseason. We're just going to have to, like a lot of these guys defensively, but for many of them the hitting has become an issue. Really like our catchers defensively. Drake Baldwin got off to a really nice start with us in a half season when we picked him up in a trade with Detroit before the trade deadline in 2026. But the last couple years has not hit too much. 235 average. Did have 26 doubles this year and 8 home runs. So the power helped get him to a 98 WRC plus. Put up a 2.7 WAR. He's been our starter against right-handed pitching, so essentially our starting catcher. Pretty pleased with him. He'll be back next year, starting to make a little more money at $3.5 million, but think he's still a reasonable option for us. Will Banfield, however, although we love his glove, has just not proven to be an effective major league hitter the last 2 years in a platoon where he's playing primarily against left-handed pitching. Hit a sickly 132 this year, no home runs in 151 at-bats, a 10 WRC plus, 169 BABIP. His contract is going to be $2.25 million next year. If we have to keep him around, he's an okay backup, but I think that if we can find someone who can actually hit a little bit as a backup catcher or a catcher playing against left-handed pitching, at this point his bat is so awful, we need to consider that. Tyler Soderstrom bounced back this year, and this is probably more what he is. 2 years ago, he put up a 135 WRC plus. Last year, he was at 98. This year, he's at 115, which is probably a more realistic number for him. 30 homers and 81 ribbies got the batting average up to a 265. OPS just over 800. He is a first base / DH for us and a solid offensive player for us, starting primarily against right-handed pitching. He platooned this year with Christian Walker. The veteran hit just 215 in 144 at-bats. He is likely going to be one and done with Oakland. We got the Yankees to retain the vast majority of his contract. It will not vest for next year. Actually, we got them to retain all of his contract, as I can see there. Says he's looking for $2 million a year. I think we have better options than that, given how ineffective he was playing primarily against left-handed pitching and his age. Darrell Hernandez suffered a pretty significant injury in 2027, came back a month and a half into the season this year, and was respectable. Hit 256, 21 doubles, 8 homers, 10 steals, 81 WRC plus, 1.7 WAR. Expected to make a little over $4 million in arbitration this year. So the question is just with the depth that we have in the middle infield right now, Do we bring Hernandez back or look to potentially trade him this offseason if we can get anything useful in return? Might be easier to move on from Hernandez if Eddys Leonard had been more productive this year. Playing primarily against left-handed pitching, though, he hit just a $150 with a 26 WRC plus. So between Hernandez in a platoon role against lefties and Banfield at catcher in a platoon role against lefties, we had two spots in the lineup that were just brutally ineffective. Leonard set to make $1.7 million next year. His spot on the 26-man roster is certainly also in jeopardy. Part of the reason we could look to move on from Hernandez and Leonard is give Max Muncy a little more of a fair shot. Primarily spent this year in Vegas at AAA, but he did put up an 81 WRC plus and 74 major league at-bats. He's versatile defensively, can play any infield position pretty competently. And given that with just 1 year and 31 days of major league service, he's still going to be making the major league minimum. He is a much more cost-effective option than Hernandez or Leonard. If either of those guys had performed better offensively, they could have potentially pushed Muncy to stay down another year in AAA or us to move on from him. But neither of those guys has put a real stranglehold on the second base spot quite yet. Hidero Endo, we spent plenty of time talking about him at the end of the last episode, so won't get into all the gory details. The good, 37 homers, 87 ribbies. The bad, a league worst 252 strikeouts, a dismal 188 batting average, all added up to a pretty league average offensive season and a WAR of a game, essentially. Not necessarily bad value for $3 million, and given our offensive issues, being able to have a league average offensive infielder who's also more than competent defensively is someone that will almost certainly be back with us next season. Brian Rincon pivoted over to shortstop when Cameron Cawley got hurt, but more likely to be in the mix at second base, although it looks like he's actually developed a bit defensively this year, splitting time between second and short. So, maybe he gives Cawley a run to be the starting shortstop coming out of spring training. Much less productive offensively this year than a year ago, dropped to a 79 WRC plus from a 113. His WAR was cut in half from excellent 4.6 as a rookie to 2.3 this year. Still a useful player. Still going to be making the major league minimum next year. Like Cawley, he's fragile physically, so don't know how much we can count on these guys. But thinking about our infield next year, Soderstrom will be back. Endo will be back. Rincon will be back. Cawley will likely be back at some point, hopefully by the beginning of the year, and Muncy probably will be in the mix. If we move on from Walker, Hernandez, and Leonard, that kind of leaves us with potentially one infield spot to try to upgrade. Speaking of upgrades, we'll turn now to our outfielders, and once again, getting a good hitting corner outfielder / DH is probably our primary need for this coming offseason. Taking a look at the players who are on the roster, Brian Buelvas spent most of the year in AAA, hit only 205 in 88 major league at-bats. Like the captain personality, like that he's competent defensively, has a little speed. On paper, it looks like he could be a pretty useful bat against left-handed pitching. Unfortunately, we don't play the games on paper. We play them on a TV screen, and Buelvas at this point is at best a fourth or fifth outfielder. Hunter Goodman picked him up in a trade last offseason with Toronto. He put up a 110 WRC plus for us, playing primarily against lefties. 13 homers and 32 ribbies in 197 at-bats helped offset the fact that he hit just 223. He is going to be making about $2.5 million this coming offseason through arbitration, given that he's really someone we'd prefer to only be playing against left-handed pitching. Probably going to be tough for us to bring him back at that kind of number, but it's not impossible. Ketel Marte, disappointing first year in Oakland, may end up being his only year in Oakland. 30 doubles, 13 homers, 67 ribbies, but hit just 242, on base percentage barely over 300, 85 WRC plus, and he was below replacement level. He's fragile physically. Fortunately, we do have an out with that team option. May look to trade him. If there's no value there, likely will decline the team option. Part of the reason we'll move on from him is that Samuel Zavala, who we picked up on waivers at the beginning of last offseason, was real productive in AA and AAA, and actually did well in a very small sample size in the majors. 5 homers, 7 doubles, and 77 at-bats. Hit just a touch under 300. Put up a 153 WRC plus before a hip strain kept him out the last day of the season, or the last day or two of the season. But he certainly could be in the mix to be playing for us in a corner outfield spot against right-handed pitching next year. Luis Lara is penciled in as our center fielder. We've signed him to a contract. The money's not that bad. Unfortunately, his performance on the field has not been that good. Hit 242 this year, 87 WRC plus, a WAR of 1. Like him defensively, but the bat is certainly not good. He did steal 19 bases for us. If he is our worst hitting outfielder, we can probably live with him in center field given the respectable defense. Problem is he was far from our worst hitting outfielder this year. Lawrence Butler, left-handed hitting corner outfielder, had a bit of a bounce back year. 242 average, not particularly impressive, but did generate some extra base hits, 24 doubles, 3 triples, 17 homers, drove in 71 runs, stole 22 bases, all in all put up a 104 WRC plus, a 1.9 WAR. He'll be making $3 million next year, probably in the mix to be a corner outfielder for us again. And then MJ Melendez is a guy that we brought up, signed him to a minor league contract before the season started, ended up bringing him up, hoping he might give the offense a boost. Barely hit 200, only 3 homers and 114 at-bats. Doesn't bring much to the table defensively, although he is a good influence in the clubhouse. He will almost certainly be one and done with this Oakland A's organization. And with that, we will call it an episode. Apologies that some of these episodes are a little quicker than I'd normally like them to be, but have had a few things come up on the home front in recent days that I need to handle, and need to go handle one of those things now. So I would rather just get the episode complete, and next time around we will take a look at our farm system, take a look at some of the best young players in baseball that we decided not to draft or missed out in the draft, or missed out on an international amateur free agency, and see how they're developing, and also see how the end of the playoffs go and who ends up being our 2028 World Series champion. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.